Hi, my name's Kevin Sims. I'm one of the physios at the National Cricket Centre in Brisbane. We're here today to talk about stress fractures in young fast bowlers and how to manage them through the adolescent years, which is a high risk time. The key things that I want you to take away from this talk is that young fast bowlers are at high risk of bone stress injury. But we also need to understand that consistent bowling during adolescence is a window of opportunity to promote bone strength, and that will reduce future stress fracture risk. We need to understand that bone adaptations take time and lag behind the immediate load by months or even years. Bowling guidelines that we have are based around an understanding of bone adaptations to load. We shouldn't be loading bone for too long. Rest periods are important to restore bone sensitivity. We need to understand peak height velocity and monitor height and weight regularly so that we can individualise the safe time to load young fast bowlers. Age is a risk factor for stress fracture. Fast bowlers under the age of 22 are 4 times more likely to suffer a bone stress injury than other age groups. Why is that? Peak height velocity is an important concept to understand. It's the point of maximum upward growth. At peak height velocity, adults have reached 90% of their adult stature, but only 57% of their adult bone strength. It takes 6 to 8 years for boys' bone to reach adult bone strength levels. There is a lag between bone growth and bone strength. And in that time, bone is relatively weak and at risk of fracture. 1 to 2 years after peak height velocity is probably the highest risk time for stress fracture, as this coincides to the point where muscle strength starts to reach its peak growth. In summary, the risk of bone injury is already high in an adolescent around the peak height velocity time. When we add fast bowling on top of this, which is a high risk activity, we take that risk even higher. Bone takes time to adapt to these loads. However, we need to make sure that young bowlers are active in this time because it is a window of opportunity to develop strong bone. On the left-hand side, there is an MRI of a test fast bowler. You can see thick white bone. That bone is strong and resistant to stress fracture. Compare it to the 16-year-old fast bowler on the right. You can see it is not as thick and it is not as strong. It is more likely to be stress fractured. It takes years for that 16-year-old bone to develop enough strength to become an adult test fast bowler. So how do we stimulate bone formation? First up, you need a dynamic stimulus like fast bowling. Do not load bone for too long. The longer you load bone, the less sensitive to bone formation it becomes. We would suggest 30 to 40 consecutive deliveries is about right. Provide rest periods. Rest periods allow bone to restore sensitivity. This allows bowling to strengthen, not weaken the bone. Cricket research suggests that less days between bowling sessions is a risk factor for bone stress injury. We recommend bowling on alternative days whenever possible. Bowling a lot of overs over a period of 2 or 3 months when you do not have a large amount of bowling in your background is a risk factor for stress fracture. It takes years to develop your bone to adapt to the demands of fast bowling. We are learning about bone stress injury relative to peak height velocity. The most likely risk is 1 or 2 years post peak height velocity when the muscle mass has reached its peak increase. This is because the muscular forces are then creating high loads on the spine, and the spine is taking time to adapt to those loads. High intensity training during that time may overload the adapting bone. So we need to be able to modify training, volume and intensity 1 or 2 years post peak height velocity. A rapid increase in height and weight over a month may also be linked to injury. We suggest that you monitor height and weight regularly in adolescence and be prepared to modify training in rapid growth phases. These are the key things to remember from a practical point of view. Try and keep your bowling sessions to 3 to 4 times per week. Consider structuring your training so bowlers get a short break. For example, 30 minutes between spells. Remember that in matches, after every 6 balls you bowl, you get a break. You should have a measure of the peak height velocity and be prepared to modify loads 1 or 2 years post peak height velocity. Modifying loads could be as simple as reducing the number of bowling sessions to 2 per week. Regularly monitor your height and weight, and again, modify if they're in a period of high growth. 1 or 2 times a week may be a good modification. Also, know when your players are highly fatigued and be aware that bone stress is higher in a fatigued situation.